everybody. Thank you for returning to our YouTube channel. I am Brian. This is my co-host here, Matthew. Matthew is a former Navy SEAL, and he has spent a lot of time volunteering in Ukraine. We're also part of an organization called Technology United for Ukraine. We bring together scientists and engineers and technicians from around the world as volunteers to help bring innovations to both the Ukrainian and civilian population. But anybody who wants to join can join. So please, if you feel like you can help us, go to the link in the description, which goes to our website, and you can join us there. All right. So with no further ado, let's get into what we're going to talk about. And what we're going to talk about is Russia's use of psychological operations and how that may be their key strategy. Matthew, why don't you start off, tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think there's two major ways that the Russians can win without, getting bogged down and running out of resources or, losing in some kind of strategic way. And one of the ways, which has probably been more successful so far, is the use of psychological operations internal to the country to some degree, but and then just as much external to the country. So, basically, if they can show that the war is, they want to basically create a narrative that says the war is hopeless to resist. You should just give in. The Zelensky administration, the Ukrainians are bad people. They're not really a nation. They should be taken over, and this is really Russia's thing, and no one should upset the world balance of power, and the rich people should just go on with their lives, and nobody should bother helping the Ukrainians because it might make everyone's life harder. Something to that degree, and that's been
you were
somewhat.
saying something interesting about that, and how they employ a lot of bloggers, not only in Russia but around the world, to promote some of this propaganda. And as we know, there may be operatives in our media in quote unquote the free world, right? And so to elaborate a little bit on that, I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the history. This isn't like a thing they just started doing. This has been something they've had that carried on from the Cold War and Soviet era days. Like those whole mechanisms just didn't completely disappear. And you can see in Putin himself, he's an intelligence operative, so he brings that network with him. I believe the head of the Russian Orthodox Church was basically installed by him, who was also part of the KGB or some variation of that.
Yeah, some facet of it.
Yeah,
And that's
so
what people don't realize is some people don't know that Putin was KGB. He was, an officer in the KGB.
right, and so like they still have that network, and that's been implemented, and it hasn't. That piece really hasn't stopped. They even when the Soviet Union fell, they still had plans in place to basically take back Ukraine. It wasn't something they, just recently were like, oh, we might want to get this back. This has been in a long-term plan. This is the odd thing about Russia. They can be extremely incompetent in some places and then extremely long planning and competent in other places. So you can't, one of the things I think the West does is they look at some of the retarded, incompetent actions they do and then think that the entire apparatus is full of that. And to some degree, it's a little true, but you can't count out some of these other pieces that they have that work really well.
And you were saying that you think they kind of, for as much strategically they can be a disaster, there are other areas they're highly effective. And one of them you were saying is psychological operations. They're tops in the world at understanding how to divide people and, create narratives and then, make people believe in this propaganda.
Right. Yeah. I think they've really kind of kept refining themselves. Like maybe back in the Soviet era, their propaganda out to the Western world, kind of seemed clunky, I think, in a lot of ways. But since the attention economy and internet and all this pieces and these kind of new methods of messaging have come out, they've definitely refined and been doing this the whole time. And it's also part of the method of how they stay in power in the Russian government itself.
Right.
So, but they've been able to kind of weaponize that against the rest of the world, uh, and against their neighbors as well. So, now they're just turning that more and more towards like the greater world, whereas before it might have been constrained to like Eastern Europe and like Georgia and these other incursions they've done in the recent past.
Belarus is a perfect example you're talking about, where they've kind of pushed narratives and put and instilled their own people in power. And
Hmm.
you have people who are very pro-Russian in Belarus.
Right, right. So, and like one of the more successful things that Putin's been able to do is kind of throw on the cloak of conservative Christianity, even though if you look at his day to day life, it's like nothing close to Christian at all.
It's very decadent.
Right. But he throws that on, and then the conservatives of the world who haven't been able to get their voice out or feel like they've had representation against, kind of the runaway left, they kind of secretly latch onto that, and then, you know, proceed to kind of, you know, see the world, whether they see consciously or not, I'm not sure, but they kind of see the world as like, oh, well, maybe it's not that bad if the Russians' influence like spreads, because, it's going to fight back against this leftist philosophy that we don't know how to take a stand against. Uh, and,
Right. And I've heard
because
that narrative. People have talked about that. Like, the kind of weird stuff that he's against the New World Order, or the weird stuff like the Illuminati, and like,
right,
well, he's resisting, and that's why the world's against him.
right,
But it all, like you're saying, traces back to bloggers and media people that have kind of bit into this narrative, because some of it's good, great clickbait, and other times, they're probably maybe got some connections into the Russian government, and they're putting out these different narratives we've heard since the beginning of war, with crazy stuff about bioweapons labs being out in the Donetsk region, that where COVID came out of, but people bought into it, and some people wanted to believe it.
right. Yeah, and they push around the Nazi theme, or push
Yep.
around a bunch of themes. They just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, and then whatever starts to kind of get a better traction, then they roll that out, even if the things contradict each other. People's memories are short. The internet, the attention economy, it fills you with so much information that it's hard to keep. It's hard to know what happened last year and the year before, and so you can have contradicting statements and non-congruent kind of arguments, but it still works. So they've just started to refine, and I wouldn't say it's just them. There's plenty of other actors that have started to refine the weaponization of this propaganda. So
And you
that
see that
that
with this war, they're getting better and better. They're finding the narratives that they have to stick to, right? To kind of get not only Ukrainian people's confidence in their government to demean it, and get them to turn against their leadership and lose that faith. And the same as other countries, right? Whether it be somewhere in Europe, whether it's France or any other nation like the U.S. that we're supporting them, they're putting narratives out there and finding the ones that are that echo the most with that culture and that society. Correct?
yeah, I think the ones that kind of been most successful is finding divisions in the West, and then stoking that by kind of polarizing the sides. um, and they've kind of, it's like you can point to corruption in, I can point to all sorts of corruption in Western countries as well. Like Ukraine is definitely has corruption issues. uh,
Right.
my
Exactly.
my main
Doesn't
my main
doesn't make the
concern,
war wrong, right? Just because
right,
there's corruption doesn't mean that the evil's any different that they're facing.
yeah, like it's definitely more of an evil to allow Russia to invade and genocide a neighboring country, uh, based off of some poorly laid out arguments. uh, even if the arguments were laid out well, uh, doesn't justify what they're doing. It just, and like continued violence doesn't justify it. So, but um, I don't necessarily want to get into just lecturing on it, but let's like looking at like what's happening in the insights. Uh, talking about the propaganda and like why that's a powerful tool for the Russians outside of uh, external support. You also have the internal support where, yes, if maybe you could push a salient somewhere and decohere parts of the Ukrainian army and capture large portions of the territory. I don't think necessarily the Russians can do that at the moment, but there is a there's an advantage to just slowly grinding your opponent down. If I can slowly grind my opponent down to look like it's hopeless, to look like the guys that go to the front don't have any hope of victory, and that I can basically create the narrative that the leadership of Ukraine is hopelessly worthless and corrupt and incompetent,
Competent.
and all
Yep.
the only thing that happens is that you go out there and even if you want to fight for your country, it's going to be absolutely useless. Like you're a waste. It's a waste of your life to go out there. If you can create that internal mentality to the country, then when you take it over, there isn't an insurgency after that
Right.
because they're revolting. The ideal is to get the people themselves to revolt against their own government, even if you're the one that attacked them. And so if you can create that narrative, then you've fully taken the country over. Like you don't have to worry about, years later there being some kind of, significant insurgency. The
And
people
I think that's
themselves.
brilliantly said because I think you have to create not only in Ukraine but outside Ukraine. You have to damage that support for an insurgency because if there's an insurgency, they still need weapons and bullets and things to be snuck in. And if you can get other countries doubting, um, you know, the uh, the belief that these people are fighting for. If you can
Right,
question, say in your own country, say what they're fighting for is wrong and it's worthless, and
right,
this is just not anything we should be investing in. Then you've
right.
destroyed the
Yeah.
insurgency
And
completely.
and yeah, and one thing, let me be clear, is like there's a reason I'm still helping out the Ukrainians. Like I see, like how the corruption works over there and what goes on, but I deeply like I have no reservations. The individual Ukrainians are some of the most individualistic people, conservative in their uh, kind of conduct, and how do you put it? Like they're they're so focused on liberty of the down to the individual that that it's a double-edged sword for them. It's like this is like the reason they might not be the most powerful country is because it's too easy to get them to fight each other over something. Uh, they have a lot of belief in themselves and their individual spirit, and that's why they fought in the initial uh, large scale invasion against what every expert said was going to be an impossible
Three
task.
days, Kiev
Right.
would fall. 3 days,
And
they said,
and
no
and the
doubt, it's
West
going to fall in
and
3 days.
The West acted that way as well.
And
They
people
believed it.
ate that right up. They ate that propaganda right up. They believed it. They said, "Listen, this is a reality. They're going to fall." And you couldn't. It was hard to find anybody who thought differently.
Yeah, yeah, but they did fight back, and that's
Mm,
that's what I love about them. And and I think the individual Ukrainians they don't like the corruption in their own government. They want to see how they can get rid of it. If you look at their history over and over again, they revolt against their governments. Um, and I think it's positive to see that Zelensky relieved that one general here recently.
yep.
And I think Zelensky, as much as you can criticize him for things, uh, I think they want to reduce the corruption as well. It's an extremely hard thing to do
Right.
in the middle of a
Look at
war.
the U.S. We struggle with our own corruption. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
it's human nature.
yeah, it's not a simple thing to do, and like where the Ukrainians are, they're kind of log jammed in a lot of ways. Like I do see a minor amount. I don't know if minor. I see a consistent. And I would like to see it go faster. I just wish it would go faster, but they're just the realities of complex systems. Uh, that the that multiple levels of people are working towards reducing this corruption. But what I would like to see from the West is amount of leadership. It doesn't have to be really public. You don't have to say, "Oh, we did all this," but to where you reward what you want to see. If you want to see, weapons used efficiently, you want to see men's lives saved, you want to see the military put into efficient actions, then find those commanders, find those units that will efficiently employ the weapon systems, and push funding that direction, or at least encourage it to go that direction. And I think that the vast majority of Ukrainians would agree with that. Even though it might not benefit them individually, if I, as an individual Ukrainian commander, or even general, try to push a new way of doing things, I'm basically upsetting the entire apple cart of the entire system. And there's a good chance that it will, make, it'll kind of upset the entire system. And so it's very hard for any one individual, even the leadership.
Right.
And this is where, I think the Western, donors, all these other people, it would be, fairly useful for, uh, let's say, a more focused um, application of the monies that come in to see, you have a particular result that you want.
Um, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, remember, go to our YouTube channel, our website, and join our cause. Link is in the description. Thank you, everybody.